The last tendrils of twilight were already grasping at the ancient pines by the time the old Land Rover finally juddered to a halt. We piled out, each of us stretching stiff limbs and inhaling the crisp, frigid air that tasted of damp earth and something else, something metallic and sharp. Above us, the skeletal branches of the forest canopy clawed at a bruised purple sky. "Well, here we are," Liam announced, his voice booming a little too cheerfully in the sudden quiet. He was always the leader, the organizer, the one who found these adventures. The Blackwood Lodge. Rustic, as advertised. Rustic was an understatement. The lodge was a hunched, timber-framed structure, its dark wood weathered to the color of forgotten blood, its windows like vacant, staring eyes. It sat in a small clearing, surrounded on all sides by an impenetrable wall of trees that seemed to lean inwards, pressing down on the cabin as if trying to reclaim it. Sarah shivered, pulling her woolen scarf tighter. "It's imposing. I thought it was just a hunting cabin." Her usual vibrant energy seemed dimmed by the encroaching gloom. "It's old, that's for sure," Maya mused, already pulling out her notepad and a small, powerful flashlight. Her academic curiosity was a comforting constant. Records suggest it dates back to the late 1800s. Originally a timber surveyor's outpost, then a private hunting retreat for a family who vanished without a trace in the early 1900s. My stomach tightened. Vanished without a trace. Liam, ever the practical one, was already wrestling with the padlock on the heavy oak door. It creaked open with a sound like a tortured groan, releasing a wave of stale, cold air that smelled of dust, damp wood, and something indefinably stagnant. Inside, the lodge was dark and cavernous. Dust motes danced in the anemic beam of Liam's torch. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, and worn furniture, covered in white sheets, stood like ghostly figures in the dim light. We split up, flashlights carving paths through the oppressive darkness. I found my way to the small kitchen, running a hand over a thick layer of dust on the counter. "No running water, remember?" I called out. "Pump outside." "Got it." Liam's voice echoed from deeper within the lodge. "Looks like the generator's still operational though, thank God." As we unpacked, an unsettling quiet began to settle over the place. It wasn't just the absence of city noise, it was a profound, almost expectant silence, as if the very air was holding its breath. Every creak of the old house, every rustle of the wind outside, seemed amplified, imbued with a sinister intent. Later, huddled around a crackling fire, the flames casting dancing shadows that played tricks on the periphery of our vision, Liam attempted to lift our spirits with a ghost story. But his usual boisterous tone felt flat, swallowed by the vastness of the room and the watchful darkness beyond the windowpanes. Sarah, who normally loved such tales, kept glancing at the windows. "I feel like we're being watched," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind that had begun to pick up, rattling the loose panes. "It's just the woods, Sarah," I tried to reassure her, though a cold prickle was starting to crawl up my own spine. "They're dense out here." Maya, however, was absorbed in an old, leather-bound journal she'd found on a dusty shelf. "Listen to this," she said, her voice hushed. "It's dated 1903. Belongs to someone named Elias Thorne. He talks about the whispering darkness and the patterns in the wood. He writes about feeling unseen eyes and the dread that seeps from the very roots of the earth. A branch outside scraped against the roof with a sound like a claw. Sarah yelped, clutching Liam's arm. "It's just a branch," Liam said, though his eyes darted to the ceiling. The first night was punctuated by odd noises, faint scratching from the walls, a distant, dragging sound that seemed to come from the floor above, and a persistent, almost rhythmic creak of what sounded like an empty swing on a rusted chain, though there was no swing set outside. I tried to dismiss it as the house settling, or animals. But the sheer regularity of the sounds, the way they seemed to circle the lodge, made sleep elusive. By morning, a thick, milky fog had rolled in, obscuring the forest entirely. It pressed against the windows like a shroud, making the already isolated lodge feel utterly cut off. "Well, hiking's out," Liam grumbled, peering through a condensation-streaked window. Maya, however, seemed energized by the discovery of Thorne's journal. She spent the morning poring over its brittle pages, her brows furrowed in concentration. "He talks about the woods having a memory," she reported, without looking up. "He believed the forest itself was a living entity, and that something ancient, something malevolent, resided within its depths, stirred by human presence." Later that day, the strange occurrences escalated. Sarah swore she saw a shadow move in her peripheral vision, just beyond the kitchen door, too tall and angular to be one of us. When she turned, it was gone. Then, while Liam and I were struggling with the ancient pump outside, we heard a faint, melancholic humming coming from inside the lodge. It was a tune none of us recognized, haunting and off-key. When we rushed back in, the sound stopped abruptly. Sarah and Maya were both standing in the living room, eyes wide, looking at each other. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered. "I thought it was you, Maya," I said. Maya shook her head, a tremor in her voice. "No. I thought it was Sarah." The air grew heavy with unspoken fear. Liam, for the first time, looked genuinely unnerved. He tried to laugh it off, suggesting we were all just overtired and letting our imaginations run wild, but the sound was forced. That evening, as darkness fell once more, the generator began to sputter. The lights flickered, plunging us into momentary darkness, only to return with a dimmer, more unstable glow. Each flicker was accompanied by a subtle shift in the shadows, making the room seem to breathe, to rearrange itself around us. Then, the whispers started. Faint at first, like the rustling of dry leaves, but growing steadily clearer. They weren't coming from any particular direction, they seemed to emanate from the very air around us, hushed and indecipherable, yet profoundly unsettling. "What is that?" Sarah whimpered, pressing her hands over her ears. "It's the wind," Liam insisted, but his eyes were darting around the room, his jaw clenched. But it wasn't the wind. The whispers were too complex, too close to human speech, yet utterly alien. They felt like thoughts trying to break through the veil of language, like ancient secrets being murmured just beyond our grasp. Maya, surprisingly, had taken on a strange, almost feverish excitement. She was no longer reading Thorne's journal, but writing furiously in her own. "He describes it," she breathed, her eyes shining in the flickering light. The sound of forgotten voices, the reverberation of a fractured past. She looked up, her gaze distant. "I think it's collecting something. Memories, perhaps. Or emotions." Suddenly, a loud thump echoed from upstairs, followed by a scraping sound that dragged slowly across the floorboards directly above us. "That's no animal," I said, my voice hoarse. Liam grabbed a heavy iron poker from beside the fireplace. "Stay here." He started towards the stairs, his silhouette long and distorted in the wavering light. "No, Liam." Sarah cried, but he was already halfway up. We held our breath, listening to the creak of each step he took. The whispers intensified, weaving around us like invisible serpents. Then, from upstairs, we heard Liam let out a choked gasp, followed by a loud crash, as if something heavy had fallen. Liam! I yelled, grabbing a lamp and rushing towards the stairs. Maya, however, pulled me back with surprising strength. Don't. We don't know what's up there. Her eyes were wide, but not with fear, with a terrible fascination. Just then, a figure began to descend the stairs. It was Liam, but not entirely. He was moving slowly, his gait stiff and unnatural. His face was pale, his eyes unfocused, staring straight ahead as if he saw something we couldn't. A dark, viscous fluid, almost black, oozed from a wound on his temple, dripping onto his shirt. His right hand, still clutching the poker, trembled uncontrollably. He reached the bottom step and stopped, his head slowly tilting. The whispers seemed to coalesce around him, growing louder, more distinct, forming fragmented words that tasted of despair and loss. Lost, forgotten, consumed, asterisk. Liam. Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. What happened? He didn't respond. Instead, he raised the poker, slowly, deliberately. But his gaze was not on us. It was fixed on something behind us, in the darkest corner of the living room, where the shadows deepened into an oppressive void. His lips parted, and a low, guttural growl rumbled in his chest, a sound utterly alien. Then, from that dark corner, a presence began to emerge. It wasn't a solid form, not a human shape. It was more like a distortion in the air, a shifting, undulating mass of shadow and despair. It pulsed, absorbing the meager light from our lamp, making the air around it seem to shimmer and twist. Whispers emanated from it, now a cacophony of voices, overlapping, screaming, crying, laughing. My blood ran cold. This was what Thorn had written about. This was the whispering darkness. Liam took a faltering step forward, then another, walking towards the monstrous void, his poker held aloft like an offering. The dark mass seemed to reach out, tendrils of shadow unfurling and snaking towards him. Liam, no! I screamed, grabbing his arm, but his skin was unnaturally cold, his muscles rigid. He didn't even seem to register my presence. His eyes were wide with a terror that wasn't his own, yet also with a strange, compelling drawl. Sarah let out a piercing shriek. She was pointing at Maya. Look at her. I turned. Maya was still standing near the fireplace, but she wasn't screaming or fleeing. Her notebook had fallen to the floor, forgotten. Her hands were pressed against her temples, her body swaying gently. Her face was contorted in a mask of agony and ecstasy, her eyes squeezed shut, and a low, rhythmic chanting was emanating from her lips. It wasn't English. It sounded ancient, guttural, a language that vibrated with malevolent power. The whispers from the entity in the corner were no longer chaotic. They were coalescing, feeding on Maya's chant, growing stronger, taking on a terrible, unified voice that echoed deep within my skull. You are ours. Your memories, your fears, all ours. Asterisk. The generator coughed, then died completely. The lodge was plunged into absolute darkness. For a moment, there was nothing but the suffocating black, the deafening silence, and the horrific echo of that unified voice in my mind. Then, a single, piercing scream tore through the night, Sarah's. I fumbled for my own flashlight, my heart hammering against my ribs, but my fingers were numb with terror. The whispers were all around me now, pressing in, insinuating themselves into my thoughts, dredging up my deepest regrets, my most shameful memories. I could feel icy fingers caressing my cheek, brushing my hair. A faint, sickly green light bloomed in the corner, illuminating the distorted figure of Liam. He was no longer holding the poker. His arms were outstretched, his head thrown back, his body convulsing as if in seizure. The shadow mass was completely encompassing him, flowing over him like a living shroud, dissolving his form, twisting it into something utterly grotesque. Then, a new voice, clear as a bell, yet utterly devoid of human warmth, spoke directly into my mind. Asterisk, welcome home, Thomas. Asterisk. I dropped the flashlight. It clattered to the floor, rolling into the darkness. There was no escape. The lodge wasn't just old, it was a cage. And we were the new occupants, destined to join the forgotten. The darkness was no longer just outside. It was inside, in every corner of the room, in every fiber of our minds. It was here, and it was hungry. And it was waiting for me. I could feel its cold, silent breath on my neck.